President Bola Tinubu there speaking just about a year ago, making promises, but the promises date all the way back to the campaign period. So today on the show, we're dissecting the what you ordered versus what you got. Electricity sector is the focus this morning. What was promised, what was ordered, what has been delivered or being delivered to Nigeria this morning. We have joining us on the show two gentlemen who will be helping us walk through this very, very tricky subject around power. Right here in our studio, Dr. Ayodele Oni, partner, Energy Practice Group, Bloomfield LP, commercial lawyer, energy law and policy. He's also the author of Renewables, Electric Power Transactions and Electricity Act 2023. He's right here with us. And right next to him is engineer Arthur Osiagu, who's a member, Nigerian Society of Engineers, managing director and CEO of CCS Technology Limited. Gentlemen, welcome to the Morning Brief.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
You know, this conversation is so important. We had to have you live because we're talking power and it's always meant to be live. We just listened to the president, and it's quite instructive, the things he said. But let's even break it down further and take a look at the promises he made in his Renewed Hope manifesto. So let's start with the generation and transmission targets. That was the very first in the Renewed Hope mandate that the president presented to Nigerians. And this is a promise he made. Over the long term, says we will seek to implement further reforms to put the nation on a track to sufficient on-grid generation, transmission, and distribution to power the bright Nigeria of our dream. So we're going to start from that leg, gentlemen. But just as a starter, just quick words from you. How would you rate the Tinubu government so far in 1 year? I think that should be a starter before we break it further. I'll begin with you, Dr. Oni.
For me, at best, modest. I think that in terms of results, and that's what people want to see, we haven't done well. We haven't done that well. In terms of efforts, I see a lot of efforts. But no one cares about efforts, right? Everyone cares about the results you see. You may also compare, you may want to do an analogy with building a house. At that point of developing the foundation, you just see a lot of mess.
Right.
It could as well be that. I'm not a part of the government, but I in terms of results, modest at best.
Modest. Engineer Osiagu.
Well, if you look at what he promised, if you go through his manifesto, he did promise 15,000 megawatts in 4 years. This is almost a year. How is the 15 megawatts in process? I'll say no. 15 megawatts is not what you do, I know, within a year, but the processes leading to it, there should have been some few things we are seeing on the ground, but that is not happening. I know how difficult the power sector is. Yes, there have been quite a lot of movement in terms of policy changes, but it has not actually metamorphosed.
So
to show the direction
average
leading to
fail.
Well, I'll say it's still work in progress, but we've not seen something that is that will give us the what we actually give us the idea to say things are beginning to pan up.
You know, they say the taste of the pudding is in the eating. Maybe now they say the taste of the power. Don't touch it though, because it will shock you. The president made categorical statements saying more accessible and affordable power to businesses and homes. So, Dr. Oni, is it that it will get worse before it gets better because it is not more accessible? Neither is it more affordable. If anything, it is more expensive now, even though some of the discos have reduced their cost, but it's really marginal. So is it that it will get worse before it gets better?
Okay, so there's always that debate around accessibility and affordability. For areas where you want to access investments, you want a lot of people to throw in risk capital. It's accessibility first before affordability, because it's market forces of demand and supply. It's the more you have, the cheaper it becomes. And power is thrives on economics of scale. That's why when you see estates that have IPPs, they're more expensive. In my estate, I think it's over 300 naira, 316 recently, based on gas pricing also. So accessibility it would not necessarily be affordable in the short term. But in the long term, if policies work the way they should be, if government walks the talk, then it should improve. You start with band A, you have rules where everybody needs to get transitioned, or at least band B and C should get transitioned. Now, it's just like when you go to church and you pray that God blesses you financially. There's a physical, you can be rich physically, spiritually, but you need something to pull it down physically. What business are you doing? Now, there are policies, there are concepts, there is the electricity law and the controversy whether the federal government can stop or not stop states taking over regulatory functions, and there is actual doing it. There's having a round pegs in the round holes. There's having implementation, which is where we usually fail, right? We have brilliant laws, we have brilliant policies. Implementation is always a problem, you know, whether we implement the way we ought to, whether the regulator does not only issue brilliant regulations, guidelines, orders, but enforces same, whether the regulator promotes rather than inhibits business. Because I also think over-regulation inhibits business rather than promote business. And people go do what they want to do and then begin to guide, not make the bar so high. You want to do a project and the regulator says you can't do it. So for me, we need to create that bridge between brilliant policies that seek to take us to a destination and implementation of those policies, which is where we fail. So you typically first get, like, you want to plant a seed to become a fruit. It typically first gets bad. Now, for me, the badness should be accessibility, maybe expensive in the short term. More people come invest, more people become more creative, technology is involved, and people begin to use scale, begin to find options that drive down the price. You know, from PNG pipeline gas, people now do virtual gas pipelines where you use trucks, people do CNG, you know. So people become more creative and prices go down. China has pushed down the price of solar systems and all of that, unlike what it was several years ago. But if we do not create that bridge between policy and implementation and make our attractiveness, here the gist around Angola, Total Energies going to Angola, because we say we always have open debates. Our debates remain open. The way the power sector debates have been open. If we do not close and ensure, investors would rather you have bad laws. Then they get brilliant lawyers, brilliant economics that can structure their deals towards achieving a goal. Than having a policy, you say A today, then you say B tomorrow. No one's going to come invest, because it's a tripod. One of those legs is consistency of policies and laws. If you don't have consistency of policies and laws, I'm not good. I won't invest, because I put down my $10 million and tomorrow I can't even monetize my $10 million. It's sunk. It's sunk capital. Risk capital gone.
So there's a wide gulf between policy and implementation.
That's what we've had historically.
You know, whenever we talk about the power sector, it seems as if the more that you try to understand it, the more complex it becomes. Because you talk about access, the demand, depending on supply. You know, but supply does not seem to be the challenge. You have 200 million people who need power. But let's take a look at the efforts of the administration from the perspective of, you know, subsidies. For the petroleum sector, for instance, you know, there are talks about the subsidies being the problem over the years, and you know, the subsidy has been debatably taken out now, but we're still where we are. There are talks about subsidies in the power sector also being part of the challenge, that many do not know that there are actually very many needless subsidies in the power sector. I'm coming to you now, Engineer Oswago, that many needless subsidies in the power sector. But it seems as if there's a pushback on the attempt by the power ministry, you know, to eliminate these subsidies such that we can begin to move towards sustainable power supply. What are your thoughts on this pushback? If this is taken out of the way, will we be closer to the administration's desire of at least achieving 15,000 megawatts?
Now, the problem is that we have a commodity that everybody is looking for, but unfortunately it's not available. And now, subsidy or no subsidy, Nigerians are looking for power. And we talked about the developmental index of Nigeria, because we can't go anywhere because there's no power. Now, why it looks as if it's so hydra-headed is because of involvement of government. Sometimes you begin to wonder, why is it that this power sector has become a big problem that it seems as if we are still moving within a circle? It's government involvement. It's inconsistency, just as Dr. Odin has rightly pointed out. We cannot move, we can't make anything work in power sector with 100% involvement of government. I have said it before, that the only way we can move forward in this power sector is for government to agree to say, yes, this is an area we can no longer play in, open it up completely, and allow people to invest. You know, investors are not coming in. Why are they not coming in? Inconsistency in policy of government. So subsidy is not really the issue now, because those who are even generating power currently on their own, they are paying so much for power. If power is available, Nigerians are really ready to pay. But it's not still available. Over 20 years, we'll still be hovering around 3.5, 4,000 megawatts, and that is not taking us anywhere. So subsidy is another aspect of it that is not the major problem now. Get off this system and allow private sector to drive this power sector, and we'll have enough power. The price may go up at the beginning, but with time, with reinvestment into the sector, price will actually go down because of, you know, competition. So we need to, you know, government need to take it, you know, and get off this power sector completely.
But we have private sector
really
participation to a significant extent now. So isn't it enough to measure the performance of not just this administration now, but even you know, the last administration? Yes,
there are lots of dislocation along the line. Power sector, private sector investment. Look at the discos, for example. Government sold the disco and retained 40% equity in it. So one would be wondering, why? What are you doing with the 40% equity? And the rhetoric is coming from government all the time, you know, sends wrong signal to the discos who actually would have gone ahead to get more funds to recapitalize and improve the infrastructure. But they are not doing that because rhetoric from government every now and then is that they may take it off. Now, out of the 11 discos, how many of them are really solvent? About only 2. So the remaining 9 are in comatose stage and it's back to government. Some of them are under receivership. Because these rhetorics keep coming that, oh, government may take it, government may take it. And that has really hemorrhaged the sector. And that's why we are where we are. And we are not making any movement. It's a big problem. Government involvement must stop.
Dr. Neil, let's come back to you on this because I've been processing how we can hack this thing. We can't generate as much as we have installed. We can't transmit the little we generate. The discos are in comatose. It sounds like we're in dire straits. Policy inconsistency has been highlighted by both of you and maybe players in this sector. Perhaps let's point out what are these policy inconsistency, or is it that there's such a jinx that doesn't want this to work? Because I was in my research yesterday and I looked at all the installation from hydro and thermal and I'm like, what is going on? We have what we need, but we can't seem to solve our problem. Dr. Oni.
Okay, interesting point. I wouldn't want to go into names, but it's obvious when the dailies report A and then say, oh, it was B. That alone, policy statements in themselves give investors signals. If you say, and what is supposedly government rumor, like saying, oh, we may upturn the privatization. Ask yourself, weren't foreigners falling over themselves to invest in the power sector in Nigeria? I mean, foreign-owned businesses are in the power sector that you know, particularly key licenses, generation, distribution. During the privatization, no foreigner bought. It was Nigerians. Financing, only a South African bank, and I won't mention, wanted to invest. Last minute, they pulled out. I worked on 10 of those transactions during privatization. It was obvious that there was something fundamentally wrong. And that's one of those things, policy inconsistencies or whether it's policy statements or whatever it is that you do put out. That's one thing. Another thing, I've always said it, that our problem in Nigeria isn't generation. Our problem, and we cannot even take the power sector out of the economic context.
Right.
If there are many poor people and tariffs go up, even if it means there's going to be more power, you're going to have what you've had with the Band-Aid thing, a lot of hue and cry. A lot of people are going to complain. So working on improving the economy and government being an enabler is a primary thing this government needs to focus on. Just being an enabler and let people run business and do not over-regulate. I'm beginning to feel that the regulator is now beginning to over-regulate. Let people run what they want to do. Have limited regulation. Encourage and enable economic prosperity. You know, if you do all of that, even when tariffs go up, people are better able to absorb. Go back to when we were more prosperous. Early stage of the Jonathan government, we're quite prosperous. No one cared about many things. If things went up, and I think those are the times, and to be fair to this government, some of these policies are good policies. The only thing is we need to contextualize some of them. And can you do all of those in one swoop? The currency issue, removing subsidy, people are going to die. Because you already have an economy in dire strait. You have an economy on life support. And then you implement some of these brilliant policies. They are by all means brilliant. It's just that in our own context. So you cannot take the power sector out of the economic context, because generation is not an issue. The problem is, if I do generate, how do I transmit? If I do not even want to do transmission, want to do embedded, want to do IPP for an estate, can they afford it? I'm screaming. And I guess I'm not poor by any standard, but I'm screaming 300 naira plus per kilowatt hour. It's crazy. That's 500K a month, particularly when my kids' friends, cousins come around. So if I'm screaming, I can imagine that's someone's salary, right? If you earn reasonably well, 500K a month is about what I do for power. So you're going to scream, because if you look at the entire economic, if we situate it economically, it's difficult, even when you speak about access, because it's going to be expensive, like you said initially. So it's many things. We need to find a solution to our grid. And I was at a dealership yesterday. I wanted to update the MBUX system of my vehicle, and they couldn't do it. They said our internet in Nigeria, they have to connect to Germany. They said internet in Nigeria is very poor, that we can't even update your car software. You know, so I think government needs to do a lot on our infrastructure backbone. Right. Transmission being one of them, because private sector is only supposed to tee into infrastructure backbone, not build infrastructure backbone. I did a research a while ago, and I discovered that if the private sector was going to take over transmission and give us what we needed, it would take them 100 years to recover their investment. What? Transmission. You want to expand, do transmission the entirety of Nigeria. He's a researcher. Maybe he wants to confirm, or he has a different view. 100 years for them to make back their money. So it's government's duty to build infrastructure backbone. Private sector is only supposed to connect, whether it's telecoms, whether it's power. So if we have strong transmission, and that's what people say, why generation isn't working. Look at the 11 utility solar projects. There are places where they can connect on the transmission network, right. And there are those imbalances. We don't have a strong EMS, emergency management system. All of these things, government just has to find a way to do it. That's why keeps collapsing. Yeah, that's why it keeps collapsing.
You already put a poser to him, but in addition to that, all of this conversation just reminded me of the Siemens deal, of a $2 billion deal, and it's been on and maybe off and on. We understand that some of the equipment have arrived in Nigeria. Some say the timeline has now been shifted to 2030, 25,000 megawatts. We could do with that. In fact, that even it overshadows the promise of the president. So this just made me remember that again. Whether or not that is coming to fruition is another thing. But I'd like us to walk through some of the other promises. Again, you can speak to them. Another promise that was made in that manifesto was to eliminate estimated billing. And this is what the manifesto read. We will ensure that all electricity bills are meter-based by streamlining and accelerating existing schemes, such as the National Mass Metering Program and the Meter Asset Provider Scheme. There's still 5 more promises to go. But you can pick and choose whichever you want to speak to. Either the Siemens deal, how far it has gone. I know that the National Assembly approved, what, $500 million World Bank loan to purchase meters. Again, that's activity. We've not seen the fruition. But it's up to you now, Engineer Siago. It's a big one.
It's the second question.
The key one I want to start with is the grid. You know, since about 7 years now, we've had more than 140 national grid collapse incidents. Which country is going to survive with that? Now, if you go back to 2013, during the unbundling of the PACN as it were then, GENCOs sold, DISCOs sold partly, then the grid, the Transmission Company of Nigeria, government left it. And we criticized that move at that time, that our grid is spanning over 1,500 kilometers, too massive. And we talked about the idea of a microgrid system, that there is no need running a grid as big as that in a country like Nigeria, that we can decentralize the grid, which also was part of what Mr. President promised in his manifesto. Yes, I know the Siemens project to improve the grid is ongoing, but it can still take us out of the woods. We can actually do some quick wins by cutting the grid, decentralize it. Lagos can have its own grid, microgrid, Ibadan, and some other major cities can have their own grid. And it will be flexible in a way that we can actually infuse some other means of generation into this microgrid. But the way it is really, really difficult for you to run a monogrid system for a country like Nigeria. That's why we are still hovering around the same problem. Now, for meter access, that's another challenge. Currently, we have about 8 million thereabout subscribers in Nigeria. And the meter penetration as it is today is still about 43%, which means we have close to 4 to 5 million subscribers that are not metered. With the increase in the tariff of electricity, and you have a subscriber who is being charged on estimated billing, it's killing. It's killing. And I said this some time ago, that the responsibility of billing has to be that of the DISCOs. But if you take that off the DISCOs and allow maybe other players to do that, you are creating a lot of dislocation. I supply you energy, I should meter what I supply you. It's as basic as that. So we have not handled the metering aspect properly, and that's why we are having issues with metering. Allow those who are supplying the energy to meter what they are giving out to their subscribers, and that's the only way we can do it, and the penetration will improve. NRC just a few weeks ago changed the way it used to be, that okay, anybody can go in, buy a meter, and you install. But the DISCOs should have that responsibility.
Because this is almost like another subsidy of sorts. If now the government is going to be purchasing the meters for the DISCOs, essentially helping them to some part of their business.
They don't have business doing that.
Well, I imagine that, under the new power law, the states should have some form of role to play in that. And I know that Akwa Ibom State, had project, of a meter manufacturing plant. So I wonder, and Dr. Oni, I want you to speak to it vis-a-vis the next promise that we're going to be looking at. The role that states have to play and the gap that is evident here, in encouraging local production of meters. Speaking of which, the next promise that identified in the Renewed Hope agenda is rural electrification. And I'm just going to read out a few lines. We will streamline and relax regulations to enable private sector, local and state government actors to electrify rural Nigeria in a safe and secure manner with reasonable tariffs. Can we look independently at the federal government's strides or lack of it in this area without looking at the absence of the subnationals playing a role here as well?
Okay, interesting one. Because I'm a lawyer, I'll start with the law. The Electricity Act, an interesting piece of legislation, gives states the right, it's not a privilege, it's a right, to demand to take over the regulatory functions. I think it's section 232 or so, subsection 2 of that law, and the federal government or NERC has no choice in the matter once the state follows that process. Now, for rural, I've always been of the school of thought that constitutionally, even before the amendment to the constitution by that was signed by President Buhari, states had the power to legislate around distribution, and no state did it. I always feel that states, when it comes to retail markets, from distribution, supply, it should be states handling. Generation, transmission, you can have a regional system like you suggested, or the federal government. I'm not sure states that are struggling with roads, traffic lights, are going to succeed with having both a wholesale and a retail market. That's my personal view. I can say something else if you ask me. If you want to achieve something else, I'll tell you how to go about that. Now, that said, I think that rural electrification, we've always had the REA, Rural Electrification Agency, which is performed averagely well over time, starting with Mrs. Ogunbiyi, I don't remember her first name, Damilola Ogunbiyi, done reasonably well until recently there were rumors around, or speak around, corruption and stealing of funds and all of that. It was alleged, right?
She had moved to sustainable energy.
Yeah, she had moved to SE for all. Yeah, she had moved to SE for all. And they've done quite a bit around, especially using renewable energy sources. Now, I think states and local governments, and that's the problem, our local governments are dead. There's so many things that should be residual matters for local governments. I think things like rural electrification, working with states, it should be local governments doing certain things, areas that are not that economically viable to, say, invest in grid enhancement for that area. You can then have off-grid, you can have the local government providing support, education, even research and development for cheaper means of generating that power. So I think what the Electricity Act is done quite reasonable. The query I have, and which I think the minister meant, was that not many states actually know what it entails to create electricity markets. They just think it's building generation plants and giving ISPO. I'm not sure that that's what electricity markets are. You have system operators, you would have scheduling, you will have, are you going to use an economic merit dispatch system? You'd have to think through it. If you can't think about solving traffic problems and all of those, I wonder how you would have both a retail and a wholesale market. So states have a role, but I think it should be around the retail market, from distribution to supply and metering and all of that. Those should be enforced.
Pardon me, beyond that regulation, but Abia State has also proven a testament to what a public-private partnership can look like in the area of electricity generation with the Abia Geometric project. So there's an evident gap, in other states in this area.
Let me come to you, Dr. Sago, on this one, just so that we dovetail into and try to wrap this up as much as possible. There's the other part of the promise which has to do with the renewable energy. They call it Renewable Energy Plan. And we try to hold them accountable for what they promised, which is why we're looking at the document.
Yeah, absolutely.
Our Renewable Energy Plan shall be based on Nigeria's commitment to carbon neutrality by 2060. Of interest to me is our solar energy plan will focus on all major parts of the power value chain to ensure that we take advantage of all that solar power has to offer in terms of generating, transmitting and distributing power across the country. What are you seeing? How much prospect do we have in that area? And is this more, viable in terms of in the short term than the big grids and all of that for us?
Absolutely, on point. In view of where we are, renewable is the only way we need to go now, to help us take us off the current trajectory. We are located in the Sun Belt, and we have a lot of solar energy in this country. Government need to take full responsibility of this and drive it. If you check properly, you discover that most homes are now going into solar energy, because the municipal power is not available. Although the initial cost, the cost outlay for you to actually put this into play is huge, and not everybody can, put the funds together. For you to put together maybe a 5 kVA generation system using solar in your environment, you may spend close to 4 million naira, and that is not easy. So government can really play a role by making sure that some little subsidy comes into Things like the solar panels, they last quite long. A solar panel can stay more than 25 years. The batteries, which is also the most expensive aspect of it, government can play a role in making them cheaper so that this off-grid initiative can actually help to solve the major power problem we're having in this country. So it's the best way to go, and we can actually make it off-grid, and everybody will have access to it if government can, put in some little cap subsidy for the batteries, the panels, and some other things that are needed. So it's the right way to go.
Dr. Maybe you respond to that as well as some of the issues that Bukola was raising.
Okay, I think that there's a lot of movement around renewables, but it's not sufficient to move. It's the pace at which you move and the strategy to that movement is also important. I do not know who the personnel are pushing that area, because that's also critical. You need people who are thinking through the process. But I see that individuals, like you said, now mount solar panels and batteries. But for me, I do not think in the long run that's sustainable. I think that you still need a strong grid system, whether you regionalize that grid or you make it a single grid. Because one, the capital outlay, two, it gets to a point where you need to change those batteries. They don't even last more than 3 or 4 years, the experience I have. So for me, at scale, that won't solve the problem. But like you said, in the short term, it will play a role in moving us away from where we currently are. But that's not the only solution. Government needs to do much more in this area too. I haven't seen enough in my own view. Maybe the debate is we have so much gas and we haven't achieved much. Why leave and not focus on that and then start chasing something else? Which is maybe a valid point, right? Because without solving the gas conundrum, we're not going to have power.
Well, in terms of rating as well, we can take a look at this promise that was made on power sector governance reform. And the promise was, we will work with the National Assembly to review the Electric Power Sector Reform Act 2005 and reform the regulatory and governance structure of our nation's power sector. Fair enough. We have the Electricity Act signed into law earlier in the year. So for that one, at least, there's a pass. But when we drill deeper, is again another thing. It's one thing to just put up a document and say, oh yes, we've achieved this, but what does that document mean for the sector in itself? And that's where you've talked about the policies and the implementation and all of that. But I want to take us back, because this conversation is something we've had for decades now, literally, and we'll most likely have this conversation next week, or when this administration is at 2 years. Hopefully not. I'm not hoping for that, but it is what it is. What is fundamentally wrong? And again, this question might sound cliche. Is it that we have borrowed a technology, which is power, generation, distribution, and the rest? We didn't invent that technology ourselves. It's something that was sort of borrowed. But it's that we borrowed the technology, we didn't borrow the know-how. It's one thing to borrow a technology, just keep borrowing phone, but you need to know how the phone works. Is that the challenge we've been having? Or is there always a string from who we borrowed it from that they always control it and say, this is our intellectual property anyway, so we always need to have control over it? What is fundamentally wrong? Do we need to sit back and say, let us develop something that is ours, that we can own? Yes, borrow the idea, but also, develop in such a way that we can always own it, and whatever happens out there doesn't affect us. What is fundamentally wrong?
Okay, my view is that over time, we've left undone what we should do. And I'll give you an instance. For example, between 1987 and about 2012-ish, 2014, there was no major enhancement of the national grid. Imagine what the population was in 1987. Imagine what the population is now and was in 2016. If you do not consistently invest, consistently enable investment, this is where you find yourself.
But our power was bad then.
Yes, it was
bad,
terrible, but it's worse. It seemed to be getting worse.
Now.
If you look at dailies in 87, you'd see those things that, oh, no power and all of that. Maybe if you go further forward, it was slightly better. Because you know what makes me particularly sad? Because I'm a researcher, I think we started our first power plant 12 years after the UK started its own power. So imagine, but we're probably 200 years behind them now. So one reason, and to be honest and to be fair to this government, is that we've consistently not seen the right things being done. We had a Batnaji who was a fantastic minister of power, and you let him go for whatever flippant reason. I wouldn't let that kind of person go. If it's business and if it's results I want, I wouldn't let a Batnaji leave. I wouldn't care what anybody else thought or said about him, about conflict. I won't, because you do not just want someone who is brilliant. You want someone who, if an engineer says speaks the niceties and says the whatever technical jargon, he knows that the guy is saying nonsense and he's saying a lie, and tells him no, but this is what it should be and this is what it should be. If you don't do it within the next 24 hours, you lose your job and it goes away. The guy's going to run and do it. But if that person doesn't really understand the nitty-gritties, you can tell him anything and he needs a briefing to be able to speak. So for me, we've consistently done what's wrong. And I hope this government will stop it. If we consistently do what is wrong and you expect good results, then there must be something wrong with your...
Are you saying, maybe you answer that, are you saying here now that in the cabinet we have now, some are just square pegs in round holes?
That's correct. That's correct.
And is that how it's been subsequently, even before now, over the years?
Yes. After the exit of Batnaji.
We haven't had professionals who understood.
I'll give you an example now. The power sector will be having issues. Now, look at the people who recruit as ministers for the power sector. We had a lawyer the other time. Now we'll have an accountant. And we are saying, why can't you make an engineer the Attorney General and Minister for Justice? Or
I see what you're doing there.
Make an engineer Minister of Health. These are the issues.
But don't you just need an administrator?
No.
A good administrator.
This is an area that is holding the fabric of the country.
But we have a lawyer who is Minister of Aviation.
We know. We know, because aviation too have lots of legal issues surrounding it. But for one, a critical sector that has pulled us down this long, we need to put round peg in round holes. And you begin to see the manifestation of things. He just talked about Batnaji. He left government, but look at what he has done in Aba. So this is exactly what we are talking about.
So let's do this now before we wrap up. On a scale of 1 to 100, which is what we'll be doing for each sector, what would be your assessment of this administration in the area of power? Dr. Oni, I'm
maybe do it again, because that's what we started from.
I'd say A and B. A for activity, maybe 60%. For the results, we see maybe 30%. That's the truth. That's the way I see it as Ayodele, not as a professional.
Average of 45%,
yeah,
60%.
Yeah. For me, I'm happy with the rework of the legislative reform, which was signed, I think, June 9, 2023. For example, now, the Tinubu state has been given full go-ahead, to regulate electricity in that state. So I believe other states should take a cue from that. On regulation, and yes, I will score the government high, but on power availability, honestly, is a no-no. We have nothing to show for it.
Okay.
You don't want to give us a number? 10%, 15%?
No. We've not done well.
You don't want to be an examiner today?
No.
Under 30?
Below 30, really.
There you go. I recall the Electricity Act was signed in February, if I'm correct, this year.
May.
No, it was, I think it was June 9th.
June
9th.
Okay, so which one was signed this year by the
no, it was an amendment.
It was
an amendment. Yes. It was an amendment to that act.
So which gives state governments the capability,
which is what we're saying, which enables the bureaus.
We don't repeat. It's not 36 mistakes. It's not 36 federal mistakes. I hope so. I hope.
We had that conversation.
I hope so.
But gentlemen,
that's where the bureau comes in.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I hope so.
Gentlemen, we'd like to thank you so much. As I said, perhaps we'll be having this conversation in the coming days, but I do hope that the conversation we'll be having is all generation, in fact, eventual distribution has improved greatly. And Nigerians are saying amen to that. There you go.
This time next year, right?
Dr. Dele Oni, he is a commercial lawyer, partner Energy Practice Group Bloomfield LP, author of Renewables, Electric Power Transactions and Electricity Act 2023. I'd like to thank you so much, as well as engineer author Osiago, who's a member, Nigerian Society of Engineers, Managing Director and CEO, CCS Technology Limited. Thank you as well.
Thank you for having me.
Well, there you have it. This is by no means the end of that conversation, but we'll take a break on it and on the show right now. And when we return, we'll turn our attention to yet another major pillar of governance in the country. Stay with us. It's a move.